Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, February 21st, 2024. Time to get started with another show. I don't even know. I'm not certain what the hell. I don't know what the hell's going on around here. I just saw as I was turning towards. I'm sitting at the desk, turning my face toward the screen, and I saw at the same time. Thankfully, I have some idea of what's going on from social media. I turned to the screen as Justice was making his suggestions and remarks about things that are occupying his mind this morning. And the second one here that I'll tell you, it just pops up that it says the 3 lines of cocaine sawdust on Hunter Biden's table saw were all over a foot long, which maybe you haven't had your coffee yet. I don't know. Doesn't make any sense to you. But as it happens, it came in line right as I saw Marcy Wheeler on Blue Sky saying, all in one day, David Weiss, the special counsel in this case, was caught calling sawdust cocaine, burned an FBI source with ties to Russian spooks to a crisp, and then failed to get that source, detained. Really stunning incompetence. I still don't know exactly what it is that she's going on about, although I've got some sense of it. The storyline that we heard the other day about one of the source behind the charges that were eventually brought, and not to mention all the ones that were made against both Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, turned out to have been lying the whole time. But apparently at some point somebody must have accused Hunter Biden of displaying a picture that showed cocaine and cocaine usage. And as it turns out, it was sawdust in a workroom on a table saw. So now otherwise, Justice's comment was completely without context. It's still not really great, quite honestly, in terms of figuring out, well, it's not a great thing to wake up to. But yeah, it seems like that's some unraveling we're going to have to do. And I've got a further explanation here from Marcy, but we probably do have to catch up at some point with exactly how bad was it Smirnov? Is that the name of the source here that turned out to have been lying the whole time? The story gets worse and worse, and I guess the incompetence or the willful insistence that they weren't going to throw their hands up a lot earlier and say, actually, this whole story is falling apart, we should give up on it, is just getting worse and worse as well. The New York Times is covering that. Greg Dworkin will be with us. He's got his own raft of stories to bring with us. There's lots of Russia to talk about today. It's going to be Russia. And I got to say, it does bring back memories of early days of the show. I mean, I guess relatively early. It was like 5 or 6 years in to the show, I guess. Maybe a little bit less. When we were first dealing with Trump during the 2016 campaign and the aftermath. And I definitely do recall, and this was part of the camouflage of the story, I guess, that it seemed so odd after so many years of, I guess, being led to think that, well, maybe our long-standing Cold War with Russia, if it isn't over, it's entering a different phase. But of course, as it turns out, it was just the obvious emergence of the kleptocracy in Russia and the rule of the oligarchs. But as it turns out, it was just uncomfortable and weird and a real throwback to decades gone by to be worried about Russian infiltration and this, and the Russian spies are doing that. It had been some time since anybody really took accusations like that seriously. And of course, even when they were making those accusations, they were often not true or not serious. But there was at least the menace of a hostile Soviet Union. And then we kind of got used to this period during which they transitioned away from, the post-Soviet era. And, well, some of the people there weren't altogether terrible. But, of course, things changed with Vladimir Putin. But it was a very odd time. And I remember in the early days of our show thinking, I feel strange saying so much of this stuff is due to Russia or Russian influence. Are we sure about this? And as it turns out, I think the story's only gotten clearer over the years. Anyway, many things to round up and catch up on. And I have some links to the cocaine sawdust story to now share with you. But I guess that's all over the news, and I just didn't realize it because I was busy making toasted coconut coffee from Hawaii's own Lion coffee roastery today, so I was preoccupied with that. It's getting better every day. All right, hey, good morning, Greg. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Excellent. Cocaine
it was funny.
sawdust?
I was chatting with some people in a completely different context about living in Hawaii.
Oh, all right.
And one of the things they said they miss, especially the people from California, is the ability to drive 50 miles in a straight line. Yeah. I haven't been to Hawaii. I've been to Iceland. I sort of get it.
Yeah. Well, you got to go around and around. If you want to do 50 miles on one of those islands, you're going to have to make some turns.
Yeah. It's just the only thing that happens. So,
but that's NASCAR.
The Russians are coming. The Russians are coming, and we have to spend a lot of time talking about that.
Yeah, I guess so. I feel like they've always been. They've been there the whole time. Armando was in fact. Yeah. And then Armando has even chimed in, saying that if he wants a hit on the Russian FBI informant thing, I have some thoughts. So we'll try and include some of those perhaps later on.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like with him or just reading what he says?
I think with him. He says...
Oh, get him on.
Yeah, all
right. I'm going
to
talk a lot about that, and he'll clean up everything.
Oh, okay. Sure. You want me to... I don't know what his availability is. I'll figure it out while you start the story.
Today, tomorrow, just at some point, get him on.
Okay.
But let me just sum up as quickly as possible with Tim Miller, who said, look, to sum it up, Russia and Putin have invaded their neighbor. They assassinated the biggest domestic political threat. They co-opted one of the right's biggest media stars, which is to say Tucker Carlson, but also Sean Hannity, and seeded a fabricated story about the U.S. president that was echoed by GOP congressional leadership and right-wing media en masse.
Well, that sums it up.
That's not a bad day's work.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a Russian spy.
Right.
Yes.
And so, you have the situation, oddly enough, where the Cold War party, the Republicans, have totally embraced Putin.
That is
weird. Come on, let's just not gin up Russians hiding under the bed everywhere. Democratic Party saying, you know what?
As it turns out,
there's a lot of stuff going on here. And so I think it's worthwhile to go over all of that.
Now, I guess we'd better.
Oliver Darcy describes this whole Burisma story, which involves Hunter Biden, bribery, Joe Biden somehow or other aiding and abetting and ameliorating corruption, and therefore he should be impeached. That's the Burisma story. And Oliver Darcy describes the Burisma story as exploding.
In the sense really, that,
in spectacular fashion. And that would be the FBI informant who the Republicans were relying on, lying about links between a bribe attempt on Joe Biden, which was completely fabricated and made up. But that guy not only was indicted for lying about it a couple of days ago, yesterday we learned in the court papers that he has active and recent ties to Russian intelligence.
Oh my goodness! I need some sort of spy music. I need like 007
so,
music.
This is like Jean Le Carré Cold War stuff.
Yeah.
So basically, this is what you might call election interference.
Yes, in a way.
And
like directly.
Donald Trump likes to call it a hoax, but I don't think that word means what he thinks it means.
Oh, well, who knows what he thinks it means.
So if you're covering it and you're a newspaper reporter, and here's the bigger picture before we get into the details of the FBI informant lying.
Mm-hmm.
If you're covering it, you have to tell the truth about the whole big picture. You
What?
can't just...
No, you don't.
GOP pivots to Biden's brother because star Hunter Biden witness peters out and they're not going after Hunter anymore.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting as they try to introduce. No. It's a totally different Biden now. You have to learn a new. I mean, it's not a hard name to learn, but.
So what I said this morning on Twitter is that this is a perfect example of what we call adding context to a story. If you cover a story that there's a House hearing, Capitol Hill hearing today, about James Biden, the president's brother.
Yeah.
And you don't add the context, you're a propaganda arm for the GOP. It's the same story.
Yeah, that would be a little ridiculous. Like, I imagine everybody would say, "What, James Biden? What? Why? Why?
Yeah, who's James?
And
I didn't even know he had a brother.
Honestly, yeah, it doesn't ring a bell for me.
What's going on here?
And really, just blurting out, "Oh yeah, no, actually, they're trying to say they're investigating what his connections are to like Ukrainians in Burisma and bribes and stuff." What, him too? What are you talking about?
Right. So I said this morning, and I think that this is the big picture that needs to be focused on and not ignored. The question on the table is whether the entire case collapses, which it should.
Yeah,
or whether the GOP decides to tough it out, in which case Democrats have more reason to run against the GOP as a collective group of Russian tools and assets.
Mm-hmm.
And since nobody in the GOP is rational, we don't know. But the point there is that Joe Biden, not Hunter Biden, not
he's
James
the one that's
Biden,
president,
but Joe
yeah?
Biden, the one you've heard of, Uncle Joe.
Right. Got it.
Dark Brandon, that guy. He is running not just against Trump, he's running against the GOP.
Well, yes.
Who are a bunch of extremists.
Okay.
In a lot of different ways, which we're going to talk about once we're done with the FBI informant stuff. So this is from the Today Show this morning. Prosecutors say the informant who allegedly lied to the FBI about the Hunter Biden case was in contact with Russia intelligence officials. And then Ryan Nobles added, for context, this quote from the special counsel report. He is actively peddling new lies that could impact U.S. elections, end quote. This is election interference.
We should put him on, I don't know what, television, Facebook, in front of a jury?
He was on the Today Show doing this.
All right, awesome. New lies. I'm glad they're new.
Audience. So it's a general reminder, the Biden and Democrats are running against not just Trump, but also the Republicans. They're inextricably linked. And for extreme views for the Republicans, well, there's the Alabama court that decided Pop-Tarts are now actual babies.
What?
Well, whatever's frozen is real or something.
Pop-Tarts.
Because they quoted the Bible, and so like anything can happen because a miracle occurs.
I guess, but
they actually decided that
Bible?
IVF frozen embryos are children.
Oh.
Which makes every accountant in Alabama rewrite their, tax exceptions.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Are they voting?
Well, also,
early?
What does it all mean? Because what rights do they actually have?
Yes. And this is, by the way, a confession that Republicans are filling out ballots on the behalf of these frozen embryos.
Right.
So,
I don't see how you can cover the election without noting the extreme. There's a story in this morning's Washington Post, Trump and allies plotting militarized mass deportations and detention camps. And then you have clear favoritism by the GOP. Those three things, the extremism on immigration, the extremism on what they did with Dobbs and Roe, the Russian favoritism by the GOP, that's the GOP. That's what Biden is running against. And I just don't think that's going to play well with like normies in the end. Sure, they're not paying attention now, but there's so much material there.
There's a lot of time to get arrested as a foreign agent between now and when people start paying attention.
So here's Oliver Darcy's case.
Okay.
Take on this. The Burisma bribery narrative pushed by right-wing media against Biden took an alarming twist on Tuesday after it imploded in spectacular fashion last week. The informant at the center of the narrative, who was charged last week with allegedly lying, admitted during an interview with law enforcement that, quote, officials associated with Russian intelligence were involved in passing along dirt about Hunter Biden. By the way, there's a very funny clip, I have to interject here, from CNN. I don't know if you saw it. Where the CNN reporter was on the air live talking about plans for the Biden administration to ramp up their campaign.
All right.
And the reporter said on live TV, so it's pretty clear that the Biden administration is really going to hone in on some of the crazy that Donald Trump says.
This is a quote, ladies and gentlemen.
That's a quote.
Okay. Yeah. They're going to hone in on.
And I looked at that. Did she say that on the? She said that on the air.
All right. I mean,
she's right.
That's okay.
It's
normies
true.
will understand it.
But also,
appreciate
Russia, are you listening?
Yeah.
You can't call it a hoax and say it's old news and we've taken care of it. Not with this stuff in the news now.
Yeah, well, that is interesting.
This is according to
That's old
documents
news.
Special
He's
Counsel
doing it
David
again.
Weiss filed in court Tuesday. David Weiss is the special counsel that's going after Hunter Biden.
Yes.
As Todd Swillich put it on X, just so everybody's clear, this would mean that Russia successfully used Chuck Grassley, James Comer, Fox News, and others to damage the President of the United States and make fake information about him, an article of faith on the right.
So?
Yeah,
Right.
well, in a court filing, Weiss also underscored the weight of Alexander Smirnov's alleged lies. The false information he provided was not trivial. It targeted the presumptive nominee of one of the two major political parties in the United States, Weiss wrote. The effects of Smirnov's false statements and fabricated information continue to be felt to this day. So while the allegations, which primarily found a home on Sean Hannity, collapse in plain sight, the dishonest MAGA media personalities who push them are either underplaying them or stoking more conspiracy. Matt Gertz, not to be confused with Matt Gaetz,
right.
Matt Gertz from Media Matters has a summary of how the arrest of Smirnov is playing in right-wing media. So they're either ignoring it or saying, you see, it proves our point somehow.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think the somehow has to do with Trump's new line about I'm America's Alexei Navalny. I'm being persecuted here. They're branding me a criminal and trumping up a case against me and all my allies and operatives in order to clear us out of the presidential race, except,
but,
of course.
what it also shows is Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity are Russian tools, and I think that's what the Democrats need to run.
Fun. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, well, they were pretty clear. Tucker Carlson was clear for a long time, saying he was rooting for Russia in the Ukraine war, and that probably stemmed actually from the fact that Trump at first thought maybe Ukraine can be for us the source of this dirt that I want on Biden, and he tried to extort it from them. And when they said no, Tucker Carlson started rooting for Russia to defeat Ukraine, and then the Russians just provided it themselves directly.
Right.
Okay.
So Marcy Wheeler tries to put all this in perspective and says, look, for people just catching up, and the thing about Marcy is she knows all the details, sometimes gets annoyed with you when you don't.
Yes.
But, really gets into the weeds. This is more of an overview, which is kind of good. But the weeds are there. Just go to Empty Wheel and you can read it all. For people catching up, let's talk about the significance of Alex Smirnov's Russian spook allegations.
All right.
It matters because Bill Barr set up a back channel by which Rudy Giuliani could share dirt, including from known Russian spies, to be channeled to Hunter Biden investigation, which was an arm of setting it up so that Trump could use this garbage in his 2020 reelection.
Yes.
So now we're not talking about 2016 now. We're talking about 2020.
Right. So
Russia
learning nothing
goes back to 2016.
Yes.
And it sort of makes you wonder, as it makes Dan Pfeiffer wonder, as we'll get to, what happened then. But, just 2020 onward, Bill Barr sets up all sorts of back channels to get dirt out of Ukraine to use against Joe Biden, and then figures we could also use it against Hunter Biden.
Okay.
Now, there's a representative, Scott Brady from Pennsylvania, who claims he vetted all these claims using travel records, but the indictment makes clear the travel records prove that Smirnov was lying about his connections.
So when you say vetted, I mean, it was on my desk while I
somebody
parroted
sent
the
it to me.
accusation.
So, I cursorily looked at it and saw who it was from, and then
saw that
moved
there
on.
was some typing
So after
on
Brady
the
did or
cover.
didn't vet these claims, the Department of Justice shut down the assessment.
Okay.
And days after Trump yelled at Barr, Richard Donahue ordered David Weiss to take a briefing on the allegation and was supposed to check these things, but he didn't really start checking them until September of this year.
Why is that?
So the claim is almost certainly why David Weiss reneged on a plea deal with Hunter Biden and charged him with a bunch of crap designed to embarrass Joe Biden during an election. The idea that this claim resurfaced may have to do with why Hunter Biden was indicted. That's important because Abby Lowell is now demanding that the Justice Department relook at this and ask, why are you doing this with Hunter Biden? What relationship does – they're asking the question Marcy's asking. What relationship does the Hunter Biden indictment have to do with this guy?
Yeah, I mean –
if any.
Given how, one, the uproar and the limited success that Republicans actually had in crying about the Carter Page indictments. Of course, they were eventually in control of the Department of Justice and could steer that. But
in other words, Marcy says, look, David Weiss reneged on the plea deal because he was facing threats to his family because of right-wing pressure. And then this charge gives him reason to go back and bow to the pressure. And is that what happened? That's what Abby Lowell is charging. And so it has real implications in regard to what happens in court from this point onward.
It's as good a theory as any. It's a better theory than, yes, everybody in the Biden family successively. If the other ones didn't take bribes, then certainly some other member of the family did, and we'll just accuse them.
And then Marcy reminds us the reason Chuck Grassley gets pulled into this is Grassley claimed that Bill Barr's Department of Justice shut down an investigation into Burisma. This investigation based on this. And then
that might be the best news for Bill Barr.
Investigation into framing Hunter Biden, which was this. And as she writes at the end of her tweet thread, few cared. But I'm covering this, and I told you, she wrote on Twitter last night, I told you I was right. I'm doing my I told you so dance.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't mind when she tells us so.
Right. So lots and lots and lots of detail.
Yeah. Quite a bit. Yeah. So Armando is available at any time. In any place, in any channel. So I guess the question is whether we...
We'll have him after the break.
Yeah, let's try and do that. I'll see if I can put him on notice.
It'll, for technical purposes, it'll give you the break a chance to see if you can get us both on the same call at the same time.
Okay.
But that's what I understand about what's going on here. So big picture is he was lying. The Republicans used it anyway. They're still going to use it even though he's lying. But it's a clear link to Russian intelligence. Democrats ought to use that just as they use other aspects of the Republican Party to show that you can't trust them because they're not only messed up with Russian intelligence, but they're so extreme on so many areas that how in the world would you vote for this party of which Donald Trump is the leader and Joe Biden should use all of that in his reelection?
Okay. It seems like it's a plan. And also, he's also forgiving a bunch of more student debt. So for all those of you who say, I don't care, I don't want to vote against Trump, I want to be able to vote for Biden. All right, well, how about this? No, he's too old when he did it or something. I don't know. Not certain what the excuse will be. But well, this does
Well,
seem
again,
right.
I would point out there's a big difference between I want to send a message.
Yes.
And I won't vote for him in November. Those are two completely different and separate things.
That's true. And you can send messages all the way up to early November.
You have a voice, you should use it. That's
I mean, I wish you wouldn't, but yes. That's right. You want it's a messaging bill for you, and it's not intended to pass, and that's okay. Or at least not intended to pass both houses. So you just pass it in your own personal house.
Right.
And tell people about it.
So in the minute or two we have left, this reminds me, so many things are happening. It's funny because on Mondays I figure, we got 4 days worth of stuff,
Yes.
and we finish early because there's usually just one big thing that happened. But on Wednesdays, there's like 25 little things that happen, and we just never have enough time to cover it all.
Yeah, well, that's the news cycle for you.
That's the news cycle for you. So things are so busy today, we're not even going to have time to relook at defeating the previous question and all that.
Oh, no. Well, no one wants to look at that.
But Josh Shooter points out something else, which is quite interesting, which is a technical thing which might turn out to be very useful.
All right.
And that is Representative Gottheimer is circulating a resolution to protect Speaker Johnson from an ouster attempt by requiring Democrat or GOP leadership to sanction a vote on any motion to vacate.
All right.
All right. This is funny for a lot of different reasons.
Yes.
But one of the reasons it's funny is it's actually reinstating a rule that Paul Ryan demanded that Congress passed in order for him to accept the speakership.
Okay.
So it's been there. It's not frivolous, Josh Shooter says. In fact, the last couple of Congresses had this rule.
That is interesting.
And they had it for a reason, and this is the reason.
And it was a Republican reason.
Yeah.
It's not like, well, this is a stupid old ossified Democrat rule. This was yours.
Right. So he says, in other words, don't cast this proposal aside. It's implausible, especially since the 118th has routinely demonstrated it's capable of the improbable.
That's well, yeah. I wonder whether they'd be able to get it together to reinstate such a rule. And they were horribly embarrassed the last time, and even a lot of the people who were eventually in favor of giving McCarthy the heave-ho, I think in hindsight.
Even those folks, they don't want to have another speaker fight, so it's an interesting off-ramp for them.
Okay, right, and they can just throw their hands up and say, I'm sorry, I want to, but it's the rule.
There's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the rules stand in the way. I mean, I voted to make that rule.
I voted for the rules, but I'm stuck because the rules make me do this.
Yes, and if it's confusing to you, it's the Russians that did it, and I'm on cocaine sawdust at the same time, like one of those bears. Okay, we'll be right back in 2 minutes, and I'll try and get Armando on the air. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time, just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I think I did it right. It sounds like everybody is on the line. Armando joins us. Greg Dworkin is here. Armando Yorens is here. We've Russians are here. There are spies probably in the background listening to all of this. Cocaine sawdust is all the rage. Whatever. Lots going on.
Right. So we wanted Armando here because, not because of spooks and cocaine, but because he's actually an expert on the law. And this is sort of confusing in terms of what's going on with this FBI informant who's both lying and got ties to Russian intelligence. So maybe Armando can explain it to us.
Is that bad?
Sounds bad.
Well, it is weirdly not a shocking development. I'm sure Greg mentioned that Marcy Wheeler, our good friend, basically predicted that this would happen. And
with pictures.
Right, as she often is. the informant, as you know, it comes from the 1023. I don't know, Greg, if you talked about this before. The 1023 is an FBI report.
I try not to use numbers with David.
It's an FBI report of an interview. Smirnov, his name is Alexander Smirnov, was a CHS informant. Just as an aside, though, how do you become a FBI informant exactly? The guy has apparently a lot of money, like $7 million, according to the filing yesterday by David Weiss, of all people, who's prosecuting Smirnov and also prosecuting Hunter Biden. How does that happen exactly? How do you become an FBI informant when you have all this money? Well,
I think there's a feeder school for it, You go and you take a 2-year course, and then you get your associate's degree, and then you become an FBI informant.
Anyway, well, he was an FBI informant apparently, and
sure, why not?
If you guys followed the story for the last 6 to 8 months, he was always described as very credible, very credible. But his story was that the head of Burisma, I can't say his name, but it starts with a Z, it ends with a Y. I won't try to pronounce it. But he was the head of Burisma, and Burisma apparently was a corrupt company, and they had a lot of money frozen in England, and that was their actual problem. That what I understood, they wanted Hunter Biden to engage in, and
I see.
Obviously that didn't happen.
I don't think we ever really did.
What happened was Viktor Shokin, then the Ukrainian prosecutor, just sort of didn't do what needed to be done to maintain that hold on the money in England. But what does this mean? It means a few things. A, it means bad things for Alexander Smirnov, even though he has been released with an electronic monitoring device. He is an Israeli citizen as well as an American citizen. He turned in his Israeli passport, but as I understood, Weiss's objection to releasing him is he could walk into the consulate tomorrow and get another passport and just leave. I don't know if that's true, but
I'm more worried about him getting too close to windows on a 4th floor.
I don't know exactly, but the Clinton crime family could very well go after him, I suppose.
Right, he could find himself in Mena, Arkansas. That's the real problem. Yeah.
So that's happening. I think it casts a pall over the Hunter Biden prosecution because, as Marcy has laid out now a number of times, the timeline of this investigation by Weiss is incredibly bad looking, because how did it all start? You guys probably covered this. This information came in. Bill Barr deputized the U.S. Attorney for Pittsburgh named Scott Brady, a Trumpist U.S. Attorney, to be the intake for all of Rudy's nonsense that he's getting from Russian agents. As an aside, Rudy has filed a defamation lawsuit against Joe Biden because Joe Biden said that in a debate that Rudy was a pawn of Russian disinformation.
Okay.
And of course, now we know. Well, we knew, but now we know that the U.S. Department of Justice, including Trump-appointed U.S. Attorney Weiss, says that's exactly what was going on. But Weiss seems to be covering it up, according to Marcy. So the question you ask yourself is anybody going to investigate that? We don't know. The only body that could do it is the Department of Justice itself, and Merrick Garland has not shown much initiative in doing much of anything. I'm in the Garland is very weak school of thought, to be honest with you. So I don't expect much from that. Senate Democrats do not investigate, at least have not investigated anything of late. And I don't know if that's just a function of the institution of the Senate or the mathematics of having a tight majority, and do you need majority votes? You need 60 votes to issue subpoenas. David, you would know more than me about why the Senate Democrats are so weak on this, investigating anything. But I don't know. So what are you left with? You're left with Hunter Biden.
It would look pretty political to investigate Bill Barr, but Bill Barr really needs to be investigated, if for no other reason than to clean up this stuff.
Well, this gives, I don't know what would be political about investigating this. How did this all even get in there? How did it get out? Remember, why did the 1023 come out in the first place publicly? Because 1023s, which is the FBI reports, aren't generally
I remember that
made
fight.
public.
Yeah, that was.
What happened was.
Go ahead.
Christopher Wray released it. Theoretically, he's being threatened with a contempt citation, but who cares about a contempt citation? Bill Barr didn't care. Why should Christopher Wray care? And, it goes to the weakness the Democrats have in justice matters, that they just let every Republican stay in place. They appoint Republican special counsel. Robert Hur is the latest example of a disastrous appointment. And of course, Weiss himself has proven to be incredibly weak. And frankly, I don't want to say the word corrupt, but clearly everything that's happened to Hunter Biden since they did that plea deal was a result of David Weiss being pressured by the Republican House and being afraid. And Merrick Garland has allowed the politicization of the Justice Department by his weakness, by his inability to say, you can't do this. My Justice Department will not be political. He's letting them be political, and I think it's a real condemnation of him. I think his reputation is rightly in tatters. And if Biden wins, I can't imagine him being allowed to stay as the Attorney General. He's done a horrific job.
It's really something.
This point particularly.
From a legal point of view, do you think that Abby Lowell and Hunter Biden have a case about, what David Weiss did was somehow associated with this, and the whole thing is suspect?
Well, he made a very strong filing yesterday, making the argument that the timeline pretty much shows that this prosecution is selective and political, and that he's entitled to discovery as to how this happened. Why do I say that? Because at the hearing to approve the plea deal that Hunter Biden entered into, Leo Wise, who is the actual prosecutor in charge, said, no, this doesn't cover everything. There's an ongoing investigation. The only ongoing investigation that could have been going on was of this so-called bribe because of the 1023 that was released by Chuck Grassley and then seized upon by James Comer and Jim Jordan. So if that's the motivation for...
So wait a minute, going back just in lay terms. Hunter Biden said, look, we'll do this plea deal, but the deal has to include the fact that when we're done with this, we're done with everything.
Right.
And
well,
the Fed said, no, there's one other thing. But if this is the one other thing, then the whole thing's crazy.
Yes. And political and selective.
Yeah.
Because that case was closed. It was reopened. Look.
Boy, the FBI and their reopening of cases. It's just...
David Weiss had closed that case because nothing had come of it. First of all, let's be honest. It's the most ridiculous allegation in the history of allegations. And the 1023 said that Hunter Biden and Joe Biden both got $5 million to do something. To fire Shokin, which didn't make sense because Shokin wasn't investigating anybody anyway. And it was just complete nonsense. But now we know.
Right. Well, I'm trying to wrap my head around this as an uneducated, non-lawyer layperson. Hunter Biden was going to come to terms with a plea deal which was going to take this off the table except for this other thing. And it turns out this is this other thing. That's mind-boggling.
You got it.
Well, that seems to be what it was. What else is there to investigate?
Yeah,
It
I don't know.
hasn't
I
come
mean,
up,
I guess
that's for sure.
they could certainly. I guess you could fabricate anything at this point. Sure, go for it. But yeah, you'd have difficulty establishing that there was a record for any other investigation.
There's no record.
Right. I mean,
And then-
that's the
Because
difficulty of
there's
it.
no bribe. It makes no sense.
And then from that, this other thing leads to an impeachment inquiry. I mean, this whole thing is nuts, and yeah, it ought to implode. It ought to blow up.
Well, the impeachment inquiry is interesting. Hey, today they're going to interview Jim Biden.
Yes.
Which, okay, fine, whatever.
I mean,
but
it's not.
Yeah, and after that, they're going to do Billy Carter.
Well, they're actually Hunter has agreed to it. I would hope I would recommend. I don't know. Abbey Lowell's a smart lawyer. He knows what he's doing. But if it was my decision, he would take the fifth. Hunter Biden is subject to 2 criminal cases right now. You can't go around talking about things when you're subject to criminal cases. I just don't understand that concept. But anyway, the thing that I noted this morning was, of course, Maria Bartiromo was not giving up the ghost, and Jim Jordan was on this morning. He said the 4 things that are proven: A, Hunter Biden became a board member of Burisma, for which he was not qualified. I've always questioned that statement. I said, what does it take to be qualified to be on a board of a company?
Yeah. Have you ever looked at any boards of companies around here?
I mean, nobody's qualified to be on a board. There's no qualification per se to be on a board.
Yeah, right. I mean, no minimum requirements, certainly.
Well, as Greg just said,
I was on a board.
Look at who's on boards.
Armando's point right there.
You put people, on I starting a company, I know a couple of guys. We'll make them the board. It doesn't require
that's
anything.
It's a small, real company, but like publicly traded companies, right? Who's on a board?
Yeah.
Well, people who know about somebody, I'm doing you a favor, here's money, here's some stock options. I mean, it's a joke. If you're really going to talk about qualifications, it's absurd. Okay, the second point Jordan made was, hey, and Hunter Biden was paid a lot of money, $1 million. Okay, that's true too. And the reality is, why was he paid $1 million? I don't know. Why was Nikki Haley paid $8 million to be on the board of Boeing?
Oh, I don't know.
Does she know a lot about planes? Does she know a lot about the plane business? She doesn't know anything about the plane business.
Well, good. Now we have someone to hold responsible for all these problems. All right, bring her in. She doesn't know anything about it? That's interesting. Okay. I guess that must be true for everybody.
Okay, so, but
you're right.
Let's just say the worst. Well, they brought him in because Hunter Biden knows people, including the president and the vice president of the United States. Okay, and maybe that's going to help us. Okay, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It, unfortunately or fortunately, whatever you prefer, it's not illegal to know people.
Right.
It's just not. So, okay, so there's nothing.
Right, if it were,
we're not even at Joe Biden yet. So here he comes to 3. He comes to 3. He says, we know, he says, that Burisma wanted Hunter Biden to fix their legal problems.
Sure.
Right?
Okay.
And, okay, say that's true. Let's suppose it's true. Well, what was the legal problem? The legal problem was in England. It wasn't in Ukraine.
Or U.S.
He didn't have a problem in Ukraine. Viktor Shokin wasn't doing anything.
Okay.
All right. So, and 4, Joe Biden fired Viktor Shokin. Well, first of all,
no.
Joe Biden did fire Viktor Shokin. He said, you're not going to get this IMF money unless you fire Shokin. And Joe Biden didn't invent that idea. Barack Obama invented it. The European Union invented it. Everybody invented it. Joe Biden just carried it out. Now,
that was a good thing, not a bad thing, and that's been pretty much debunked as a talking point. But yes, they still use it.
What are we investigating? But, and I'm on the record that it was a terrible idea to have Joe Biden be the person to send that message with Hunter Biden having that involvement. It shouldn't have happened. It really was a bad look, and some people noted it at the time. But now you're talking about impeachment and investigation. There's nothing to investigate now. All right, it was a bad look. But then you looked, and Joe Biden didn't get any money. And of course, he didn't get any money. He carried out a policy that was not Joe Biden's policy. It was Barack Obama's policy. It was the European Union's policy. It was the IMF's policy. It was the World Bank's policy. Everybody said Ukraine had to fire Shokin because Shokin was corrupt. That's what they said.
Yes.
Joe Biden didn't admit that. It's just a fact. So there's nothing to investigate, and this is foolish. And of course, this is an impeachment that was sponsored by, fed by Russian intelligence
to Rudy Giuliani via Bill Barr, and pushed by Chuck Grassley, and then promulgated by Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson. And so they're all wrapped up in this. It's just amazing how deep this goes.
Right. And then you got the backdrop of the Ukraine war where, Navalny gets killed, assassinated by Putin, and Mike Johnson won't put the Ukraine aid bill on the floor, even though it'll probably get 300 votes.
Yes.
Who's working for Russia here? It's the Republican Party. They are working for Russia. That is what is happening in the United States of America, and it's not even arguable.
Yeah, and I'm happy to tell you we covered a little bit of that in the first half hour, because you know why? It's not even arguable.
Yeah, well, we've covered it for years. It's entirely possible, and I guess just evidence mounting of like I don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense. It makes you, for years, it made me feel foolish to talk about the idea of, well, a Republican Party being in thrall of the Russian president and working for Russia. It made me feel like I was some sort of weird John Bircher. And that was part of the camouflage of the story. I have to imagine that at some point they thought no one will believe Democrats running around saying Russia, 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 especially if we are constantly mocking the idea. But as every other Republican accusation turns out to be a confession, sometimes their confessions turn out to be confessions too. It's really rather remarkable. And the 1023 things, by the way, just to go back to that and to use the numbers again. And you were asking the question of how do you become an FBI informant? And I mean, I think I'm not one, so I don't know for sure. But I mean, if you walk into an FBI field office and say, I have information, they'll take a 1023. They have to. Right? And they just write notes. It doesn't matter whether you are believed by them or not. They just say, all right, a contact has been made. We'll all be in trouble for espionage if we don't write this down. So we'll write it down. And they realized, as is often the case, essentially nowadays the FBI informants who have information on the Bidens are essentially the Chris Rufos of FBI informant world. They come in with a story that's calculated to be explosive. The FBI agents roll their eyes and say, this is ridiculous, but we have to write it down. But don't worry about it because 1023s aren't released. It's raw intelligence, unvetted. We don't give it to, we don't run it up the chain until we work on it. We don't give it to the politicians. But knowing that, you have people like Grassley and Jordan and others who know that the FBI policy is not to release those things and instead take the tack of, well, what is the FBI hiding? And knowing that they can't turn over the 1023s without extraordinary pressure. So you send somebody in to set up some incredible lie. The FBI guys write it down and put it in a file because it's stupid and they know it. And then you run the what are they hiding play until finally people like the credulous Merrick Garland say, well, at the risk of looking like I'm covering something up, I will release this. In this case, I guess Chris Wray is directly responsible for these things. And I guess you could wonder whether that was part of the play from the beginning or not. But he always played the reluctant FBI director in releasing these things. But you send somebody in to tell an egregious lie, ask, why are you hiding this egregious lie? And then force idiots to say, I don't want to look like I'm hiding anything. Let's release it because, of course, everyone will recognize it as absurd. And then they don't. And then 5 years later, you find yourself in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, this guy was handled. There was a handler. just a guy walking into an FBI office. It just, look, I mean, honestly, you should look at what the hell the FBI is doing. I mean,
I guess I think they have to take the statement if somebody comes in and offers something.
Take a report and you put it in, but they gave this guy a handler and he's credible.
I like that,
The guy was credible. He wasn't credible. He was a Russian agent.
When I was growing up, I wanted to be an FBI informer, but as I got older, I realized my true ambition is to make it so I could have a handler.
Yeah,
listen, let me tell you something. The FBI is incompetent. People do
it
not
is
understand
kind of weird.
how the FBI is.
I guess
they bring it many times in a million ways, and I think people don't realize how bad the FBI actually is. If you actually follow, there's a case. What was that lawyer's name that Durham did? The prosecutor, that poor lawyer.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll see if I can find it while you're expounding on it.
Making a mistake on a form.
FBI did in that investigation, it's a disgrace. They don't know what they're doing. They're really incompetent. People should actually be much more worried about how incompetent the FBI is.
Well, weren't they the people investigating Justice Kavanaugh?
Yeah, well, they did that too. But
that's true.
But how about January 6th? All the information they were given that something was going to happen, and they didn't say a word. No big deal, no problem. Anyway, that was an aside, just letting you know that I've long believed the FBI is completely incompetent. But on this Russia thing, look, I mean, how does it get investigated? Well, if Merrick Garland had any gumption, he would have an investigation. How did this happen in my office? Okay.
May be afraid to find out.
If the FBI was any good, how did this guy get to be a credible source? He's a Russian agent.
That is kind of odd. I mean, honestly, just looking back on it, I suppose, you got to take the 1023 on anybody, whatever. But yeah, like when you come in and say, well, he's telling this incredible story about Russian involvement in this, that, and the other thing, or Ukrainian involvement in this and that. What's his name again? Alexei Smirnov. Are you kidding? Is it Boris Badenov is his name?
Yeah.
That's crazy. I don't know if I believe this guy. No.
It's pretty crazy. And I'm actually curious how he made his money. I don't know. I don't know anything about the guy.
Well, how would we?
His name. I assume we'll find out in the course of this proceeding. But guy has $7 million.
Yeah.
What did he do to make $7 million?
Hey, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
I guess so.
Right, he lives in Las Vegas. How does he live in Las Vegas? It's crazy.
Israeli passport.
It's all very fishy to me.
Well, listen, it's perfectly clear. I mean, he doesn't have that much money. He lives in his wife's apartment. How did she get the money? Well, he gave it to her.
What?
It is really something. And then they burned everything about the guy in that filing yesterday. In essence, to the degree that he was an asset and he had assets in Russia.
No longer.
I mean, it's all completely burned.
Well, that's why I'm not worried that if you let him go, he'll flee. I'm worried that if you let him go, you won't be able to find him after that.
I'll put it to you this way. There's going to be a lot of people falling out of windows, I think, in Russia.
That was my first thought.
I guess so. I'm not. So the burning of his connections, were we talking about?
Yes,
Smirnov.
The people he talked about in Russia. They
how do you
identified 5-6 sources that he had in Russia.
Right, and if he didn't know this guy, he knew his wife. He was in the car with this other guy when they had a phone call, so he knew that one. There's at least 6. Yeah.
Yeah.
Detail. Clear detail that would identify them to the Russians, at least.
I mean, I think anybody who knows the Russian system here would know now exactly who they're talking about.
I guess so.
So
I don't know how you don't
it is
burn
one of the
those
most
guys.
bizarre, frankly, shameful episodes for the DOJ, for Weiss, for Garland, in my opinion, for the FBI.
And for the Republicans, and from a political perspective, I would just say, I think it's a BFD.
I guess so.
It proves that, and again, as I said, with the backdrop of the war in Ukraine, and the fact that there is this money that's sitting there, that needs to go to Ukraine, and it doesn't go to Ukraine. It goes to American arms manufacturers. That's the funny thing is it's not really going to Ukraine. It goes to American arms manufacturers who then send arms to Ukraine so they can fight with the Russians and Mike Johnson and Donald Trump and the entire Republican Party. I'll excuse part of the Senate Republican group. They certainly are part of that, but it's the party of Russia, which has always been since Donald Trump, and we know this. And I go back to the report that still was one of the most stunning things of all time, and no one cares, or even cared, was the meeting at Trump Tower with Paul Manafort, Jared Kushner, and Donald Trump Jr., where they were expecting to meet with Russian agents who were going to work with them to help them win the election.
Yes, that does seem odd.
Now, that was nothing. And in that sense, Robert Mueller's this goes back to Robert Mueller and his failure. I mean, that's enough to charge conspiracy, in my opinion. But okay. At least it's a conspiracy. I thought I was meeting with actual Russian government intelligence officials, and maybe I wasn't. But I thought I was, so what the hell?
Yeah.
Well,
we only have a few minutes left, but in the few minutes we have, you think the Supreme Court's going to do anything today?
No.
Okay. Yeah, that would be a little quick, wouldn't it?
You want to talk about that?
Because we can.
Talk about run us out the hour, yeah.
All right. Well, let me just tell you, in my view, the Supreme Court is going to take its sweet time. And I think they're going to grant cert, pretend to go faster, but not that fast. So they'll have arguments in April and then maybe a decision in June.
What about a stay? That's the important decision.
I think that it's very – I thought not, but I'm unfortunately now very pessimistic, and I think they will grant a stay.
That would be bad.
I think there will be 5 votes from stay.
Do they make excellent luxury motor homes in Russia or something? Anything we don't know about? Maybe that. Well, they were always had his vote, obviously, but
yeah, no, they had Alito and Thomas, possibly Gorsuch. I thought Cody Barrett, Roberts wouldn't go along, but I think they're going to do some fake expedited, which really isn't expedited.
Interesting. All right. Well, Greg, we'll see you again Thursday.
Yeah.
All right. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I can't actually tell what the hell's going on anymore, and I think Greg is gone. Armando, I think, also had to take off for the day. But if anything else occurs to you, Armando, you're certainly welcome to send us a note or just call right the hell back in and say, I forgot to tell you, I didn't get back around to naming the name that you were looking for, and I think it was Michael Sussman that you were looking for, who was indicted in the Durham investigation and ended up being acquitted. There was a conviction somewhere along the line. Kevin Kleinsmith, Wikipedia tells me, FBI attorney Kevin Kleinsmith was in, and I don't even remember that story, but I mean, it's only one brief paragraph. If I can just fill in that background, a paragraph in the Wikipedia entry for Durham's investigation was that, let's see, a criminal investigation arose out of it. The New York Times reporting in 2019 that Justice Department Inspector General had made a criminal referral to Durham regarding Kevin Kleinsmith, a low-level FBI attorney assigned to the Mueller probe, who had resigned in February of 2018. Kleinsmith was accused of altering an email during the process of reviewing a FISA wiretap warrant against Carter Page, who we mentioned in the first half of the show, just by way of, I guess, by way of comparison to or the success that they had on the Republican side of disputing the Carter Page investigation by raising issues with the provenance of the investigation. And now I would imagine that if they have the opportunity to do so. And Abby Lowell's the kind of attorney who probably wouldn't miss such an opportunity and hasn't missed the opportunity is by bringing this up now on behalf of Hunter Biden. Yes, sometimes it can turn out that if there's this kind of difficulty, confusion, or outright, hints of corruption in the provenance of an investigation like this, yes, at least in days past, when there were Republicans under investigation, it seemed like the reasonable thing to expect that the FBI, or rather the DOJ, would in the end drop the investigation and the charges. At any rate, and not only that, but as you can see, turn to convict the FBI personnel involved in improperly perpetuating the investigation once dropped. And that happened to Kevin Kleinsmith. Kleinsmith pleaded guilty to a felony violation in August of 2020 for adding the phrase, quote, "and not a source," unquote, to a statement by a CIA liaison saying that Carter Page had prior contact relationship with the CIA from 2008 to 2013. I don't know if I can really sort that sentence out for you, but that's the basis of it. On January 29th, 2021, Kleinsmith was sentenced to 12 months of federal probation and 400 hours of community service. It's not like he went into the clink here, but the judge stated that Kleinsmith, quote, likely believed that what he said about Mr. Page was true and that he had taken an inappropriate shortcut. He also said the IG inspection Inspector General's investigation, did not establish that political considerations played a role in Kleinsmith's actions, which would be somewhat different, I think, in the Hunter Biden context, where the whole thing was about political considerations. So just throwing that out there, something to consider. Let's see. I guess by way of background, in case you weren't up to date on all of it, I thought it might be worthwhile to read through the New York Times explanation of where we stand, and I'm sure it's been updated since then, but I have this piece from just yesterday by Glenn Thrush and Alan Feuer, who write under the headline, "Ex-Informant Accused of Lying About Biden's," we know who that is, Smirnov, "said he had Russian contacts." So in case you were wondering, well, where do they get this information that he had Russian contacts? The answer is, I told them that. But the problem is, he's a bit of a liar, like a gigantic liar, and it's not entirely clear whether he's also lying about his Russian contacts. Federal prosecutors portrayed the former informant, Alexander Smirnov, 43, all of 43 years old with his $7 million, as a serial liar incapable of telling the truth about even the most basic details of his own life, which again sounds familiar and also indicates that perhaps Alexei Smirnov, Alexander Smirnov. I don't know why I'm calling him Alexei Navalny, but I guess wink, wink, you start calling him Alexei Smirnov. It should have made it more obvious. Oh, he's in contact with Russian agents. Yes, that's right. Oh, well, when you call him Alexander, it's so hard for me to imagine that. Anyway, it may indicate that perhaps he does stick around. He doesn't abscond with his $7 million to Russia or Israel or anywhere else. He runs for Congress in New York's 3rd Congressional District and wins. Maybe that's what's next for the guy incapable of telling the truth about even the most basic details of his own life. If you had difficulty, believing the story that overlaps the entirety of the Republican Party at this point and this sort of scandal, I guess just keep in mind that up until recently, and I guess they tried to paper over it by expelling him from Congress, and that's the right thing to do. But up until recently, there were members of the Republican Party in Congress, elected to Congress, who lived this very lifestyle. It's not just that there are weirdos on the fringes as FBI informants. They are formally part of the Republican Party and elected to Congress as such, in the face of everybody's understanding that, hey, we don't know who the hell this guy is, although it was late in coming, I guess. for the wider audience in the George Santos saga. Except we did demonstrate, not that I was paying that close attention to New York 3 or anything, but we were able to demonstrate that credible news reporters in district were shouting from the rooftops insofar as publishing in a local newspaper is shouting from the rooftops. And it's supposed to be. It used to work that way. That he was a complete fraud and they couldn't even establish that he was who he said he was. And yet, but I guess that's all part of it, right? The whole Republican operation, really, I guess any party's mission is to, carry their candidates to victory. But I guess still the case, I think, at the moment, you can still say that there's only one party that's laundering these wackadoodle, wholly invented mystery people into credible candidates and electing them to Congress. Anyway, just think about the George Santos saga alongside this one as well. So here's the story, as the New York Times was reporting it. A former FBI informant accused of making false bribery claims about President Biden and his son Hunter, and maybe also the president's brother as well. And if that doesn't work, then maybe his cousins. And also, by the way, think about all the other things that other Republican operatives have been doing, stealing Biden's granddaughter's diaries and was it daughter? I don't even remember anymore. This sort of nonsense. Anyway, just throw that in there alongside it all. A former FBI informant accused of making false bribery claims about anybody who has the name Biden, which were widely publicized by Republicans, because of course they would do that so that they could, I guess, maybe blunt the claims against Trump, but also just run against the Biden. Well, you can't elect him. He's totally corrupt. Who says? A Russian agent who told us that if we said that he was totally corrupt, people would buy it. And if they wanted evidence, we would invent it and then we'd give it to you and then you could publicize it. Don't worry about it. We'll give you just like we have candidates in the box, we have corruption charges in a box now. The box comes from Russia. Anyway, this all according to a court filing on Tuesday, for which you can get in an enormous amount of trouble if you're also lying, right? How do we know that the people who say that he was lying aren't lying? Well, we don't yet, but you don't file this in court unless you're willing to go to jail for it, which I guess, could happen, except that as it turns out, the guy is admitting to his lying, so it doesn't look like it's going to work out that way for you. In the memo, prosecutors portrayed the former informant, Alexander Smirnov, as a serial liar incapable of telling the truth about even the most basic details of his own life. But Mr. Smirnov told federal investigators that officials associated with Russian intelligence were involved in passing a story about Hunter Biden. So on the one hand, why did you say something like this unless it was really true? That's insane for you to admit to something like that. On the other hand, you're a super liar, so are you lying now? Legitimate question, but you might in the end sort it out this way. Why would he tell us a super lie that will just land him in serious trouble and maybe even jail, versus why not lie in a way that will try to get you out of this situation rather than deeper into it? These disclosures, including Mr. Smirnov's unverifiable claim that he met with Russian intelligence officials as recently as 3 months ago, make him a flight risk and endanger national security, Justice Department officials said. Smirnov had been held in custody in Las Vegas, where he has lived since 2022, since his arrest last week. He was released from custody on Tuesday on a personal recognizance bond. Why? After a detention hearing, said his lawyers, David Chesnoff and Richard Schoenfeld. I guess, you do wonder about that. Well, we arrested him 3 weeks ago, and we've held him since then because he's a flight risk. But last Tuesday, we decided, what changed? I don't know. Prosecutors did not specify which story Russian intelligence is said to have been fed to Mr. Smirnov. Is that right? Not specify which story Russian intelligence is said to have really fed to Mr. Smirnov, an Israeli citizen, Remember that. But they suggested that they could not believe anything he said, and they had many tales to choose from. Again, I don't know what the details of the release are, but we're like 3 paragraphs into the story. Armando's no longer here to talk about FBI incompetence, et cetera, but can I just reiterate what we just read? I know I go off on tangents. They use florid language that makes twists and turns, but did I not just read, we can't trust him, he's a serial liar, we can't even trust him to give us the basic details of his own life, we think he's a flight risk, he's got dual nationality, he's got passports from other countries, maybe he did surrender one, the other, but he's such a serial liar, we can't even be sure what the details of his own life are. Your Honor, we were looking to have him released on a personal recognizance bond. Yes. What? Why? I don't know. I do not know. I'd love to find out more about that, but that won't be the subject of this article. But again, the purpose of my sitting here reading you articles that you could be reading on your own, or maybe you already did read on your own, is to, I think, to ask questions like this. How do we proceed from this? He can't even be trusted to tell the truth about the details of his own life, but we released him on personal recognizance? Never mind that. I have another story to tell you. Now, they may have a legitimate story to tell. I'm sure they do. They're good reporters. I'm sure we'll be happy to have read the other facts that they have on offer here. But, I mean, is that not a showstopper? There's no sidebar about how you get released on personal recognizance in this situation? Well, here we go. The memo, and I forget what memo we're talking about here, just to back up. I don't even know. Does it even say anything about where is this memo? I got to go back to the beginning now. Yeah. Court filing. Oh, yes. Oh, in the memo. Is the memo something that they filed with the court? In the memo, prosecutors portrayed the former informant as a serial liar, et cetera, et cetera. Now back up to this other paragraph where we left off. The memo describes Mr. Smirnov as a human hall of mirrors, not a ball of mirrors. He's not a human disco ball. That would be very interesting. And then I would understand why you would release him on personal recognizance. I have no beef with disco balls. They're fantastic. But this is a human hall of mirrors, confusing and disorienting rather than mesmerizing and entertaining. He fed the FBI bogus information about the Bidens. The Bidens, the guy's the president of the United States. What are you doing? This should be one of the most difficult things to walk out of jail from. And yet, in the interest of fairness, go ahead. So, he fed the FBI bogus information about the Bidens, misled prosecutors about his wealth, estimated at $6 million. He lost $1 million along the way, while telling them he worked in the security business, even though the government could find no proof that was true. Yeah, the $7 million security business. $6 million, sorry. The misinformation he is spreading is not confined to his false claims about the Bidens, wrote prosecutors working for David Weiss, the special counsel investigating Hunter Biden on tax and gun charges. Remember, those are the ones that ended up not being settled because, we're not going to just wrap up all of our prosecution against you. We have more. It's based on lies. But we have more, so therefore we have to blow up the plea deal. Now, the misinformation Smirnov is spreading is not confined to false claims about the Bidens. He is actively peddling new lies that could impact U.S. elections after meeting with Russian intelligence officials in November, they added. That appeared to refer to Smirnov's claim made in late 2023 to the FBI that he had spoken to the head of a Russian intelligence unit, who said he had intercepted phone calls made by guests at a hotel overseas. Very vague, but okay, those included several calls placed by prominent U.S. persons that the Russian government may use as compromat in the 2024 election, according to prosecutors. In other words, if this is what I think it is, I love it. more dirt on prominent U.S. persons who presumably are not Biden's because they led into this whole thing by saying that the misinformation he's spreading is not confined to false claims about the Bidens. Who else might there be? I guess take your pick. Could be anybody. Could also be the Bidens as well. Okay, so the Russian intelligence unit guy says we have phone calls intercepted at a hotel overseas, we don't know where, saying something incriminating or something that could be used as compromise. Smirnov also told his FBI handler that he was involved in meetings to help resolve the war in Ukraine. He was going to fix that as well. And that he had knowledge of assassination squads operating in a third-party country. Certainly could be true. Russians are operating assassination squads in third-party countries with some frequency these days, as it turns out. So, I mean, I guess I'd take that report as well. I love that he was going to resolve the war in Ukraine. I'm going to fix that. And also, by the way, I have an Israeli passport. Why don't you fix that war, by the way? Anyway, last week, Mr. Weiss charged Mr. Smirnov with fabricating claims that President Biden and his son each sought $5 million bribes from a Ukrainian energy giant, Burisma, demanding the money to protect the company from an investigation by the country's prosecutor general. And I know that's just giving us background, but why do you recount everything if it turns out that the allegation was a lie? Why not just simply say he fabricated claims that Biden and his son each sought $5 million bribes from Burisma? You know, that information. Well, I don't understand. Why would it be credible that he would ask for a $5 million bribe? Oh, good question. I'll explain that one to you. Okay, well, let me ask you another question. How does he get released on personal recognizance if no one can believe anything he has to say? I don't know. Moving on, let's give you the details again about the fake Burisma charges. That's all right. Those allegations, which prosecutors now say were brazen fabrications motivated by Smirnov's animosity toward the president, that's important, were widely promoted by congressional Republicans who cited it as justification in their now stalled effort to impeach Mr. Biden, which they're going to try to do again, this time just tell the lies about Jim Biden and then say the guy's related, so impeach the president. Smirnov was taken into custody last week as he walked off an international flight from what prosecutors described as a months-long multi-country foreign trip. During that trip, he claimed to have had contacts with multiple foreign intelligence agencies and planned to embark on a similar trip days later, according to the memo. Why even come back, one wonders. What makes the Smirnov case so unusual, aside from its political significance, is the willingness of the FBI to publicly burn a confidential informant who had been on the Bureau's payroll as recently as last year. I mean, that's splashy, but I mean, I don't know. You know why you burn such an informant? Because he was worthless. He was lying to you the whole time. I understand, I guess, technically, maybe there's some value when we say, I want you to tell me which Russian intelligence officials told you this story. And by the way, did they also tell you, this story is fake, but we want you to plant it in the American intelligence apparatus or justice apparatus or political apparatus or what? But I mean, they can still get that information from him if he's, willing to tell, but how do they know when they'll be able to believe him or not? I don't know. So I don't know. What makes the Smirnov case so unusual to me is the political significance. I love that they say, well, aside from the political significance, what's so unusual about it is that they're willing to burn a source. Well, a fake source. You have to be willing. I mean, what else are you going to do when you find out, oh, you've been passing us fake stories from Russian intelligence? Well, we don't want to burn you because that would be unusual. Well, when you say burn, what do you mean? Oh, I mean prosecute you for lying to the FBI. Well, why don't you want to burn him for that? He's a spy. Burn the hell out of him. That's not unusual. I don't know. This whole thing is a weird, I don't know. I feel like something else is going on. And I don't know. I guess they said these things at a DOJ briefing, so they wrote them down. But given that they also said, oh, yeah, we can't trust them at all, and we released them on personal recognizance, write that down and just say it. I guess I can believe the rest of it. as well, that it happened, that they would tell them this stuff and they would just write it down. Also on Tuesday, Hunter Biden's legal team filed motions in federal court arguing that the arrest of Smirnov, while unrelated to the charges Biden faces, the gun and drug charges, yes, okay, has tainted the public's perception of their client, making fair trials impossible. It now seems clear that the Smirnov allegations infected this case, said Abby Lowell, Biden's lawyer, that is to say Hunter Biden's lawyer, who accused Weiss of following Mr. Smirnov down his rabbit hole of lies. And he clearly did do that. And I guess maybe you could say trying to make amends for it now by arresting Smirnov. But yeah, and I think Lowell maybe is just being careful, and if it's interesting that was pretty categorical, but he's still being careful. He could be arguing, as I think Armando was alluding to, while Smirnov's lies don't have anything to do with the gun and drug charges that Hunter faces, the manner of their prosecution clearly does have something to do with Smirnov and his lies. And that's what Greg was pointing out. While the allegations against him and the charges against him were valid with respect to the gun and drug charges, he was there prepared to plead out and enter into a plea agreement that would have ended the case and largely removed it from the headlines as well, but for the objection that, no, we aren't closing everything out. Biden, I think, probably justifiably thought, well, if I plead out, that ends my problems, right? Because why else would I plead out? Honestly, otherwise, if it's going to be dragged out forever anyway, I might as well make a case in court and see how it goes, or at least make some points in court, given that this is a politically connected prosecution, if not politically motivated, because it's at least legitimate. Did have the guns, did have the drugs, right? But beyond that, why is this otherwise simple case that could be dispensed with quickly if it were any other defendant still dragging on? And if the answer is, well, because we're giving credence to a serial liar who we know is making up BS and feeding it to the FBI so that Congress can say, what are you hiding? And then demand that we give them the 1023 and then wave that around as though that were anything. I mean, at a minimum, you would say, all right, well, if things were fair, when we get back around to finally dispensing with these otherwise legitimate gun and drug charges, I would say, Your Honor, you know, I've been punished enough here. Remember, this whole thing was dragged out. My father was damaged. I was damaged. My uncle is now being threatened and damaged, all based on lies that you probably should have known were lies a long time ago, but were perpetrated and perpetuated just to make more trouble for me and my father and my family. And you ought to take that into account when you're sentencing me. I was prepared to cop to this whole thing a year ago, and this has all been dragged out based on BS. You know, but I guess that's an argument that has to be constructed rather carefully, and Abby Lowell knows what he's doing, and we'll do it gently, I guess. Whereas we get the luxury of doing it more bluntly. Okay, just wanted to put that one out there. Let's see. What was this? I wanted to, I don't know whether this was the reason I put this aside. Sometimes it's difficult to tell which of the very many subjects wrapped up in a news summary from Blue Virginia, which, you know, does daily summaries just like everybody else. And I can't remember which one of these was the reason that I put this thing aside, though the headline tells us, Wednesday news, FBI informant said Russian intelligence involved in Hunter Biden's story. Yes, Trump wants Christian theocracy, also a headline. Biden has canceled nearly $138 billion in student loan debt so far. And Alabama ushers in the theocracy. Which of these was the items I put it aside for? And there's no telling, because this summary of bullet points of story, it's unfortunate. Sometimes there are a couple of news sources which are often fun and interesting, but which, once you run them through Pocket, turn out to be useless, because there's just like no way to figure out what this was supposed to lead to. And I guess, unfortunately, Blue Virginia is one of them. All right. Well, that leaves us in the lurch, but we got 2 minutes coming to us to collect ourselves and decide what's important to try to put on the record for you for today's show. And I think we might just end up having to stick with the subject. Maybe we turn to empty wheel at this point. Since we're already confused, we can't do much worse than by adding a little bit more confusion through an embarrassing riches of detail that Marcy often provides us with. We'll see. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, well, didn't clarify very much from reading through the Blue Virginia list. It's a good list, an extensive list of headlines from around the country and around the world. Although, really, if you need those things explained, you want to make your way through that jungle. Well, as it happens, there's an app for that, and it's called the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and comes after our show right here on Netroots Radio. So, as always, you ought to stay tuned for that. But we're not quite there yet, and it might be, it's always a risk, might be wise at this point to jump back to what Marcy has had to say, although I think maybe the first way in is to look back in the Skype notes that Greg sent with a link to what Marcy has been up to this morning. And here is a headline that will only make sense to those who have been following for the longest amount of time. Although, honestly, boy, I'm looking at this piece that explains the sawdust thing. I guess it's related to this, and it's mostly a giant grab quote from what? I don't know. One of her own pieces from earlier, which tend to be stem winders. But here we go. Let's see what happens. Smirnov and blow, meaning the fake cocaine thing, except it says ablo, like ablo. Is that we're referring to somebody whose name I don't recognize here? It's an A bracketed before the word blow. There should be a slew of Hunter Biden filings coming in today, most in California. She begins. I'll post them here until I do a longer read, but a longer read, really? They've filed their first one, a reply on their motion to compel that we can have fun with in the meantime. Hunter's lawyers mock David Weiss first for mistaking sawdust for cocaine, and then it says, they cite me. in it. That's interesting. Not me, but her, me. And then raise the arrest of Alexander Smirnov. The Smirnov bit is the most important argument because it makes the same, in my very humble opinion, compelling argument that I did, that the renewed focus on the Smirnov allegations are probably what led David Weiss to renege on a plea deal. So it does sound like that's at the center of what's going on here. So what are we looking at? Is this the motion to compel, or is this one of her previous write-ups? It's difficult to tell, and I mean, the only link provided so far in her write-up is to that motion to compel, but we'll see. Okay, I'll just read it to you. Another development just last week further informs Mr. Biden's request for an now motion, to compel. Oh my goodness. It looks like, I don't even know what to tell you here. This is what it reads. Another development just last week further informs Mr. Biden's request for an now motion to compel discover. I imagine this is a motion to compel discovery, and the Y is missing. On February 15th, 2024, Special Counsel David Weiss unsealed the remarkable indictment of former FBI informant Alexander Smirnov. The Special Counsel's indictment notes that Mr. Smirnov expressed his bias, that's a quote, bias, against President Biden, which also contains a typo here, and was telling a farcical tale that Burisma, a Ukrainian company, enlisted Mr. Biden as an unregistered foreign agent and paid bribes to him and then Vice President Biden that proved to be so outlandish and unsubstantiated that the FBI field team recommended its investigation be closed, and the then FBI Deputy Director and then Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General, that's Richard Donahue, agreed to close the investigation in August of 2020. Nevertheless, with prodding from extremist Republican members of Congress who initiated an impeachment inquiry of President Biden based on the same baseless allegations, and the right-wing media, the prosecution team that was already pursuing Mr. Biden, Hunter, resuscitated the baseless investigation of Mr. Smirnov's ridiculous claims against Hunter Biden 34 months later. It now seems clear that the Smirnov allegations infected this case, and why. On July 26, 2023, the special counsel answered as it did the court's question about whether the diversion agreement's immunity provision, that's the plea deal for Hunter, would bar charges under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Lo and behold, some 7 months later, the special counsel finally figured out that Mr. Smirnov was lying, which should have been obvious to everyone, certainly by August of 2020 when DOJ closed the investigation. The special counsel charged Mr. Smirnov with lying and obstruction, but the more interesting part of this story is not that Mr. Smirnov lied. It is more remarkable that beginning in July 2023, the special counsel's team would follow Mr. Smirnov down this rabbit hole of lies as long as it did. Disclosure about why the special counsel abandoned its June-July 2023 agreements with Mr. Biden and the role played by the Smirnov allegations may reveal flaws worse than mistaking sawdust for cocaine. Despite the prosecution's strong words in its opposition to this motion, its actions demonstrate that the prosecution has gotten much wrong and provides good cause for Mr. Biden to question whether it has gotten its discovery obligations right. Mr. Biden's DOJ requests as well, I guess we're reading footnotes here at this point, and I don't know, because they involve Scott Brady, perhaps we ought to read them. How many of these notes refer to the above? So are they all from the above section, or are they just also important? The footnote 4 reading here, the discussion about the scope. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped number 3. Biden's DOJ requests, as well as his Rule 17 subpoena requests, seeking communications and records from, among others, Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General Richard Donahue. All right. and Scott Brady, a U.S. attorney for Western District of Pennsylvania, bear directly on and are probative of the allegations in the Smirnov indictment. The fact that Special Counsel Weiss handled the Smirnov investigation and is prosecuting the case make Biden's requests all the more important. I guess at this point, because these are footnotes, they are important pieces of information, but they'll only end up confusing the issue more. I think it's been laid out pretty straightforwardly here. This will be the last briefing, Marcy says, that Judge Mary Ellen Noriega gets before deciding on the motions to dismiss, so the timing of the Smirnov indictments becomes important. Anyway, she says, I'll update when those other filings get posted. And just to click on the front page there, let's see whether there's anything new here. And there appears to be more since this, but let's see. There's also Smirnov admits Russian spies passed on lies about Hunter Biden, but we've got the basic of that story. And there's also new postings. Hunter Biden's California motions to dismiss. I guess she's gotten a hold of them. And anything else here? Let's see what's up at the top. I guess the motions to dismiss is the newest thing. I don't know whether they're just giant, a list of giant, or rather a giant list of links here. So it would be a little bit too much for us to dive into them. She's going to give herself a couple of days to figure out what's going on here. And it looks rather detailed, and we'll have to wait and see how those things develop. So in the meantime, we could turn back to one of the other major developments that she's been following in the last couple of days. How Merrick Garland mistook a Trump hitman, that's Robert Hur, for a career prosecutor. Let's run through this one, shall we? This, too, is, has its twists and turns, but it bears on the comments that Armando was making earlier about Merrick Garland's performance in the job to date. When Merrick Garland appointed Robert Hur to spend a year reading through Joe Biden's diaries, among other things that he did, which were rather unusual and unorthodox, he emphasized that Hur was a career prosecutor, even while describing his role as his appointee, had played as Rod Rosenstein's principal associate deputy attorney general. That's a long title. She's using I don't know whether they actually use this acronym, but it's certainly a lot easier than saying principal associate deputy attorney general, PADAG, PADAG. I don't know whether anybody just pronounces it that way, but PADAG is just as easy. And anyway, so Robert Hur, when she refers to reading through Joe Biden's diaries, that is essentially the function he took on while he was investigating the classified documents case, right? The few classified documents that were discovered to be in Biden's former non-vice presidential offices, as well as his residence, and that they included apparently handwritten notes and notebooks, which are essentially diaries that Biden kept while vice president, in which he was keeping notes for himself about what was going on, things that were important to remember for his official functions, which ordinarily would have been, I think, her argument is, exempt from such examination. Just to jump back to what she's talking about here, I'll at least give you the headline. Robert Hur complained about Biden notes that Trump almost certainly already declassified. I don't know what that's actually, you know what? That only makes things worse. It's very difficult to jump into the middle, as you know, of a Marcy Wheeler storyline. Anyway, so yes, when Garland appointed Hur to take on this case, he emphasized that Hur was a career prosecutor, even while describing the role that Hur had played as Rod Rosenstein's PADAG, remember? And then as a Trump-nominated, Senate-confirmed U.S. attorney. What did he have to say about him at nomination time? Mr. Hur has a long and distinguished career as a prosecutor. In 2003, he joined the department's criminal division, where he worked on counterterrorism, corporate fraud, and appellate matters. From 2007 until 2014, Mr. Hur served as assistant U.S. attorney for the District of Maryland, where he prosecuted matters ranging from violent crime to financial fraud. There's more, but it's standard boilerplate stuff that an attorney general might say about someone he believed to be a credible career prosecutor, a non-partisan career employee of the DOJ. Now, Marcy goes on to say that in my opinion, hers, the vast majority of Merrick Garland's critics mistake this, Garland's naive belief in the good faith of people who have been DOJ employees, for a kind of caution or partisanship. And I was going to ask about this too, and really we should have Marcy come and explain this thing, but who knows whether it would clarify or just make things more complicated. But my impression has been that for a long time, there were a lot of people frustrated with Merrick Garland who thought that he was dragging his feet in investigating the January 6th insurrection, for instance. And Marcy has, my impression is that she had spent a long time saying, listen, this is an extraordinarily complicated thing. It's not that he's trying to wash his hands of it, or, to continue with the hands metaphor, that he's sitting on his hands. It's that he's conducting a meticulous investigation. And while that could certainly be true in the January 6th context, it could also, not be how she views his investigation of other matters. But my overall impression was that she was giving Garland a lot more benefit of the doubt than most other people are. But it seems like this, at least this incident, is, with Smirnov, is changing her, and with her, Robert Hur as well, changing her overall evaluation of Garland's performance. So anyway, back to what she's actually written here. In my opinion, the vast majority of Garland's critics mistake Garland's naive belief in the good faith of people who have been DOJ employees for a kind of caution or partisanship. Garland simply believes, I think, that something about working for DOJ rubs off on people and stays there. Even the people who did scandalous things during Trump's term. Although I think she's getting around to saying, and that's a mistake. This is not the only time that faith has or could result in really grave consequences for DOJ's ability to hold people accountable. The problem is, with Robert Hur, Garland should have known better, and not just because Hur was obviously a senior member of Trump's DOJ. At the end of last week's Jack podcast, and it's available in a link here, Allison Gill and Andrew McCabe discussed the role that Hur played in Trump's DOJ. You remember McCabe, dismissed from the FBI just days short of vesting in his retirement? Yes. McCabe pointed to Hur's role in imposing limits on the Mueller investigation, to which, I've noted, Marcy says, Hur didn't adhere in this review, by the way, and participation in a gang arrest press conference staged at the White House, unusually enough, breaching the separation between the White House and DOJ. So Hur's got a bit of a record as coloring outside the lines, shall we say. But Hur has a more specific role in carrying out a partisan hit job for Trump. Just after 1:02 in the podcast, and I don't know whether that's an hour and 2 minutes or a minute and 2 seconds, but the stuff recorded last week, McCabe described that Hur played a role in, quote, overriding the process that I, McCabe, was entitled to, and basically accelerating the decision to fire me, McCabe, in an effort to get it done before I could retire. So the key player in that storyline turns out to have been Robert Hur. McCabe claimed that Hur violated his due process. This is funny. This is where it really becomes a joke that the guy's name is Hur. It's like the Who's on First routine. Hur violated his due process, yes, to fulfill Trump's demands to fire the former FBI deputy director, McCabe, rather than let him retire on schedule. Then Marcy says, as I laid out in McCabe's 2019 lawsuit against DOJ, for months leading up to McCabe's firing, Trump had been complaining that DOJ hadn't fired him yet. Against that background, on March 5th, 2018, FBI and DOJ started the process of using DOJ IG's problematic report, finding that McCabe lacked candor about serving as a source for one of Devlin Barrett's biennial right-wing hit jobs as an excuse to fire him. Time was short. They had less than 2 weeks to do it before McCabe's designated retirement date, depending on how you calculate it, which could have been any of the days from March 16th and 19th inclusive. It was a little bit blurry, but anyway, racing against that deadline. The process started with Candace Will, the head of the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility, preparing a recommendation to fire him. After some discussion on March 5th about whether, in response to McCabe attorney Michael Bromwich's request, McCabe's team should get a copy of the IG report in advance so as to have more time to respond, Candace Will laid out in a handwritten note, reproduced here, sent on March 7th, that she would just send the letter reporting DOJ IG's referral, Inspector General IG, but not the report to Bromwich. Without saying it directly, Will was signaling that she was not going to give Bromwich any extra time to respond, so playing right into the plan to get rid of McCabe. That same note made it clear that without intervention from the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein's office, it seems unlikely that this will reach final conclusion before McCabe's March 18th retirement date. Those rushing to fire McCabe before his retirement recognized on March 7th that the only way they could fire McCabe before he retired was via Rosenstein's involvement. The same morning, Will explained that they couldn't manage to fire McCabe before he retired without intervention from Rosenstein's office. She then sent an email to her asking him, that is to say, Mr. Her, to speak on the phone about a matter being forwarded to the DAG, Deputy Attorney General. Remember, at this point, Her was Rosenstein's top deputy. Her and Will spoke that evening. Will's notes from that conversation were, when released via Freedom of Information Act, almost entirely redacted under a deliberative information privilege. They appear to memorialize what happened at a meeting between Her, that is to say, Mr. Robert Her, Rosenstein, and Scott Schools that day. Schools, the senior career associate deputy attorney general at the time, played a role in DOJ that was always supposed to ensure ethics. In that role, he oversaw the review process leading up to McCabe's termination. An email thread documenting how the Office of Legal Counsel head, Stephen Engel, interpreted the SES, Senior Executive Service, guidelines on firing, which Her then forwarded to Schools, who forwarded it to Will, likewise remains heavily redacted under deliberative exemptions. Those documents, what Robert Her told Will on March 7, 2018, and how Stephen Engel spun guidelines mapping out what kind of due process senior employees get before you can fire them, are among the records that McCabe would have gotten in discovery if the Department of Justice hadn't settled his lawsuit. DOJ redacted less of the emails showing what Will kept Schools, and at times Her, informed of how Michael Bromwich frantically tried to review the entire case file in time to mount a real legal challenge. But even there are deliberative discussions withheld from release. One thing is clear, with each request Bromwich made, DOJ took days to respond because they were getting closer and closer to his retirement. So drag it out. In the lawsuit, or drag out his inability to actually fight it so as to be able to preserve his employment until the firing date. In the lawsuit, McCabe's lawyers noted that Bromwich wasn't given emails and statements involving FBI's press person, Michael Corton, that the DOJ IG had ignored, emails that were exculpatory, until the day before Bromwich had to present McCabe's case to schools. Certainly, Andrew McCabe has reason to be biased against Robert Hur, because Hur was part of the team that forced McCabe to fight for years just to get a pension earned over decades. But you don't have to take McCabe's word that Hur played a part in overriding the process that I was entitled to and basically accelerating the decision to fire me in an effort to get it done before I could retire. Take Merrick Garland's word on what happened. In response to a question from Chuck Grassley shortly after the settlement, Chuck Grassley, who was busy also laundering fake stories from the Russians, Garland explained why career lawyers at DOJ said that they should settle with McCabe. And the answer is because they were going to lose the case. As Garland puts it here, the case involved a claim that he was not given an amount of time necessary to respond to allegations, and the litigators concluded that they needed to settle the case because of the likelihood of the loss on the merits of that claim. In other words, they were caught dead to rights, dragging their feet and making it impossible for McCabe's lawyers to get the information that they needed in order to successfully plead their case with the FBI that McCabe ought not to be fired. Garland delivered this heavily rehearsed and inaccurate, though that's not the only thing included in the suit statement. This explaining that the team that rushed to fire McCabe so that they could take his pension away had not given McCabe the amount of time required to respond to the allegations against him. On October 27th, 2021, over a year before he named one member of that team, Garland naming her, that deprived McCabe of his due process to lead an investigation into Joe Biden. So for a year before he actually named her to the job, Garland should have known and did know that one of the key players in that mistake that led the DOJ to have to settle their case because they had made some enormous leaps in, had taken some shortcuts so that they could cheat to win their case. They now have to settle the lawsuit case, having screwed up the firing case. And then Garland says one of the key people who took the shortcuts that made it possible to fulfill Trump's demand that McCabe be deprived of his pension is now in charge of investigating Biden. Well, that probably should have raised the flag. Garland was clearly just repeating a well-rehearsed answer in his response to Grassley, who was probably, and Grassley's interest in all of this is, well, why did you settle the case with McCabe? Why didn't we fight to keep his pension away from him? And the answer is because we effed the whole case up and we're going to lose it. Anyway, it's unlikely, Marcy says, that he reviewed the matter closely enough to know that Hur was one of the people, according to the career attorneys who said DOJ would lose this suit, who deprived Andrew McCabe of due process. Though Garland knows how DOJ works, he should have known the universe of people who might have been involved. As high profile a case as the McCabe case was, if you're depriving a deputy director, of the FBI of his pension and firing him, we know what offices that goes through. We know who held those offices, and we know that Robert Hur was in the middle of all of that. Because I just recounted his bio to you when I introduced him. I should have gone, oh, wait a minute. This is a guy who's been involved in something that we can't reward. Given how politically contentious the decision to settle was, it is also virtually certain that people in Lisa Monaco's office did review the details closely. In fact, traditionally, the person who would review matters that, like this one, involve weighing ethical considerations and the potential of a big black eye for DOJ is Career Associate Deputy Attorney General, that is to say, the successor to Scott Schools, who was involved in the firing. In July of 2018, Jeff Sessions appointed Bradley Weinsheimer as Schools' successor. It would be shocking if Weinsheimer didn't review the decision to settle the McCabe lawsuit, but if he did, that would be cause for further concern, and that's because Weinsheimer is the guy who rejected complaints from Biden's attorneys about Hur's politicized attacks on Biden. By settling Andrew McCabe's lawsuit, DOJ conceded that Robert Hur and others had deprived the former FBI deputy director of due process. They violated DOJ's rules to do Trump's bidding. Then DOJ, regardless of all of this, put Hur in charge of an investigation of Joe Biden. That's the important part. Thankfully, we got to the end of that one. And even we can understand that tale as Marcy tells it. In order to have gotten to the point where they ended up having to settle a lawsuit in favor of Andrew McCabe over the process by which he was fired, somebody had to screw up. Somebody had to be acting unethically. Somebody had to be taking shortcuts with an extraordinarily important investigation. Why would they do such a thing? Because they were bending to Donald Trump's will. Why would they do that? Well, we may never get to the bottom of exactly why it was that they were in the thrall of Donald Trump, but they were. So is that a person that you appoint as a nonpartisan career employee to investigate, let's say, the one person that Donald Trump wanted burned by the judicial system more than anybody else? Probably not a great choice. And yet, it was exactly the choice they made, and maybe that is what leads people to believe that Merrick Garland isn't exactly at the top of his game. Okay, time to hand things over now to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Some of these stories probably won't even be related to the legal system at all, but let's see what they might be.
From netrootsradio.com.
Oh, no, I'm wrong.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Check out this summary. Letitia James told Trump to pay up or he loses the building. That's judicial. Then on the rest of the menu, the Supreme Court. Oh, they're judicial too. Well, they're ready to make their move in Trump's criminal case. And the GOP star witness, you know all about it, to impeach Joe and Jail Hunter, part of a Russian spy network. So yet more about this. And why not? Stay tuned.